A Christmas morning like no other. The snow fell in thick, silent flakes, blanketing the streets and rooftops of the quiet little town. It was Christmas morning, and while most people were still nestled in their beds or opening presents with loved ones, Daniel Brooks was unlocking the doors to his small auto repair shop on the edge of town. At 38, Daniel had spent nearly 2 decades working on cars. His shop was his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the familiar sounds of engines humming and tools clinking against metal. Daniel was a quiet man, known for his tireless work ethic and a heart as steady as the engines he repaired. While others saw Christmas as a time to relax, he saw it as an opportunity to help those who might find themselves stranded or in need. Not everyone gets a break, even on Christmas, he often reminded himself. That thought brought him comfort as he turned on the lights, the soft hum of fluorescent bulbs casting a warm glow over the rows of tools neatly lined up on the walls. The shop was modest, with an old coffee maker sputtering in a corner and a tiny artificial Christmas tree on the counter. The tree was barely a foot tall, but its blinking multicolored lights added a touch of cheer to the otherwise utilitarian space. Daniel adjusted the radio, flipping through static-filled stations until he landed on one playing holiday classics. The cheerful tunes felt oddly out of place in the empty shop, but Daniel let them play anyway. He had barely taken a sip of his lukewarm coffee when he heard the sound of a car engine sputtering outside. Glancing out the frosted window, he saw an older sedan crawling to a stop just outside his shop. A woman stepped out, bundled in a heavy coat, her breath visible in the icy air. She hesitated for a moment, looking up at the sign before pushing open the door. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a mix of apology and desperation. "I hate to bother you, especially on Christmas, but my car just broke down. I didn't know where else to go." Daniel set down his coffee and gave her a kind smile. "You're not bothering me at all. Let's take a look." The woman introduced herself as Rachel Lawson. She explained that she was on her way to her parents' house with her 8-year-old daughter, Emily, when the car started making strange noises. "We were so close to making it," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. I didn't know what else to do." Daniel nodded as he listened, his gaze drifting to the car. It was an older model, the kind that had seen better days. He stepped outside with her, the cold biting at his hands as he popped the hood. Rachel stayed by the car, trying to keep Emily calm. The little girl sat in the back seat, clutching a small wrapped gift and peering out at Daniel with wide, curious eyes. As he examined the engine, Daniel could see the problem right away. A worn serpentine belt had snapped, and it had caused a cascade of other minor issues. "You're lucky you stopped when you did," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's fixable, but it's going to take a couple of hours." Rachel's face fell. "Oh no, we were supposed to be at my parents' place by noon. Is there any chance?" "I'll get it done," Daniel interrupted gently. "You've got places to be, and I'll make sure you get there." Relief washed over Rachel's face. "Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much this means to us." "Go ahead and wait inside," Daniel said, gesturing toward the shop. "There's coffee and hot chocolate by the counter. I'll let you know when it's ready." Rachel hesitated for a moment before nodding. She guided Emily inside, the little girl clutching her gift tightly. Daniel watched them for a moment before turning back to the car. He grabbed his tools and got to work, the cold seeping into his gloves as he tightened bolts and replaced parts. The hours passed quickly as he lost himself in the familiar rhythm of his work. Inside the shop, Rachel and Emily warmed themselves by the tiny Christmas tree. Emily occasionally peeked out the window, watching Daniel work. She seemed fascinated by the way he moved, her eyes wide with curiosity. Every so often, Daniel would glance up and catch her staring. He'd give her a quick smile, and she'd duck out of sight, giggling. By mid-afternoon, the car was running smoothly again. Daniel stepped into the shop, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. "It's all set," he announced. Rachel sprang to her feet, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you so much. How much do I owe you?" Daniel hesitated. He thought about the cost of the parts and the time he had spent. But then he looked at Emily. She was holding her gift tightly, her excitement barely contained. Rachel's relief was mixed with a trace of worry, and he could tell she was already calculating how much this unexpected expense would set her back. "Nothing," Daniel said finally. "It's Christmas. Just get to where you need to be." Rachel's jaw dropped. "I can't let you do that. Please, let me pay you." Daniel shook his head. "Consider it a gift. Besides, it's Christmas. You've got someone waiting for you, and I'm sure they'll be happier to see you than I would be with a check." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes, and she hugged him briefly. "You have no idea how much this means to me. Thank you." As the car pulled away, Daniel stood in the doorway, watching until the taillights disappeared into the distance. For the first time in years, he felt the true spirit of Christmas, not in gifts or decorations, but in the simple act of helping someone in need. He returned to his quiet shop, unaware that his small act of kindness was about to change his life forever. An unexpected visitor. The morning after Christmas dawned cold and gray with the promise of more snow. Daniel arrived at his shop early, as he always did, the memory of Rachel and Emily's visit still fresh in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Emily's wide-eyed curiosity or Rachel's overwhelming gratitude. It had been years since he felt his work truly made a difference, and their reaction had left him with an unfamiliar sense of fulfillment. The shop was quiet as Daniel went about his usual routine, organizing tools, checking inventory, and catching up on the never-ending paperwork that came with running a small business. The radio played softly in the background, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the previous day. It wasn't often he felt connected to the people who passed through his shop. Most of the time, they were just customers, a name on an invoice, a car to be fixed and sent on its way. But Rachel and Emily had been different. As he filed away invoices, the phone rang. Daniel picked it up, his voice steady and professional. "Brooks Auto Repair. How can I help you?" "Mr. Brooks," a deep voice said on the other end of the line. "This is James Lawson. I believe you helped my daughter, Rachel, yesterday." Daniel sat up straighter, surprised. "Yes, sir. She and her daughter were having car trouble on their way to see you. I hope they made it safely." "They did," James replied, his tone warm. "And Rachel hasn't stopped talking about how you went out of your way to help them. I wanted to personally thank you for what you did. It's rare to find someone as generous as you these days." Daniel felt a flush of embarrassment. "I was just doing what anyone would. It didn't feel right to charge them, not on Christmas." "Well, it wasn't just a car you fixed," James said. "You made their Christmas. My granddaughter hasn't stopped talking about how kind you were." Daniel smiled, picturing Emily's curious gaze. "It was my pleasure, really." "Still," James continued, "I'd like to do something to show my appreciation. Are you free later this week? I'd like to stop by and thank you properly." "There's no need for that," Daniel said quickly. "I was happy to help." "I insist," James said firmly. "Please, humor an old man. I'll see you soon." Before Daniel could protest further, James ended the call. Daniel set the phone down, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension swirling in his chest. He wasn't used to people going out of their way for him, and the idea of someone stopping by just to thank him felt foreign. Still, he couldn't deny a growing curiosity about Rachel's father and what he had in mind. 3 days later, as Daniel tightened the last bolt on a customer's engine, a sleek black SUV pulled into the shop's parking lot. The vehicle was immaculate, its polished exterior gleaming even under the overcast sky. A tall man with silver-streaked hair stepped out, dressed in a tailored coat that spoke of quiet confidence and wealth. "Mr. Brooks," the man called, his voice carrying over the sound of the idling engine. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward. "That's me. You must be James." James extended a hand, his grip firm. I am. Thank you for taking the time to see me. Of course, Daniel said, gesturing toward the shop. Come on in. Inside, James looked around the modest space, his gaze lingering on the neatly arranged tools and the tiny Christmas tree still blinking on the counter. You've got a good setup here, he said. Been in business long? Nearly 15 years, Daniel replied. It's just me most of the time, but I built it up slowly over the years. James nodded thoughtfully. Rachel told me you didn't charge her for the repairs. That's a rare thing these days. It was Christmas, Daniel said with a shrug. It felt like the right thing to do. Well, James said, reaching into his coat pocket, I believe good deeds deserve recognition. He pulled out a plain white envelope and handed it to Daniel. Confused, Daniel opened it to find a check inside, one with an amount that made his breath catch. This is too much, he stammered. I can't accept this. It's not just a thank you, James said, raising a hand to stop him. It's an investment. I've been in the auto business for over 3 decades. I own a chain of shops across the state, and I know a good mechanic when I see one. More importantly, I know someone with integrity. Daniel stared at the check, his mind racing. The amount was enough to cover months of bills, replace some of his aging equipment, and still leave him with a safety net. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, James said with a smile. And if you're ever interested in something more, give me a call. I could use someone like you in my organization. With that, James stood, extending his hand again. Daniel shook it, still too stunned to respond. As James left, Daniel sat at his desk, the check in his hands. He looked around his shop, the place he had poured his heart and soul into for so many years. The idea of change was both thrilling and terrifying, but for the first time in a long while, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a future that went beyond the 4 walls of his little garage. Later that evening, as he locked up and stepped out into the snowy night, Daniel felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. A decision that changes everything. The shop was unusually quiet the following morning. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the check James Lawson had given him. He had spent most of the night turning the envelope over in his hands, replaying the man's words in his mind. An investment, James had called it, not just a thank you. But what was Daniel supposed to do with it? The money could transform his shop, new equipment, better tools, maybe even a part-time employee to lighten the load. Yet the promise of something more lingered like an echo in his thoughts. Daniel had always been a man of routine. His shop was his second home, and the idea of stepping away from it, even for something better, felt almost unthinkable. But then there was James's offer, a place in his organization. It wasn't just about fixing cars anymore. It was about growth, about stepping into something bigger than himself. That afternoon, as Daniel worked on a particularly stubborn engine, the bell over the shop door jingled. Wiping his hands, he turned to see Rachel Lawson standing there, bundled in a thick coat, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Rachel," he said, surprised. "What brings you back?" She smiled, holding out a basket wrapped in clear cellophane. Inside were cookies, a small bottle of cider, and a handwritten card. "I just wanted to thank you again, properly this time. And Emily insisted we bake something for you." Daniel took the basket, his smile softening. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," she said, stepping inside. "But we wanted to. You didn't just fix our car. You saved our Christmas." He set the basket on the counter, glancing at the little card peeking out from the cookies. "How's Emily?" Rachel's smile widened. "She's great. She's been talking about you nonstop. I think she thinks you're some kind of Christmas hero." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm no hero. I just did what anyone would." Rachel tilted her head, studying him. "Not anyone would. And my dad thinks so, too. He told me about the check." Daniel stiffened slightly. "He didn't have to do that. It was too much." Rachel shrugged. "That's just how he is. But honestly, I think he sees something in you. He doesn't offer opportunities like this lightly." Daniel leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "It's a lot to think about. I've been here for so long. This place, it's mine. It's hard to imagine walking away." Rachel stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the best opportunities. You gave us a gift we'll never forget. Maybe it's time you let someone give you a chance for a change." Her words lingered long after she left. Daniel sat at his desk, the basket untouched, and pulled out the card. Rachel's handwriting was neat and deliberate, each word carefully chosen. "Thank you for giving us a Christmas miracle. You have a rare gift. Don't be afraid to share it with the world." He folded the card and slipped it into his pocket, staring out the window at the falling snow. Rachel was right. This was more than just a check. It was a door, one he had to decide whether to walk through. The next morning, Daniel called James Lawson. The phone rang twice before James answered, his voice as warm as ever. "Mr. Brooks," James said, "I was hoping to hear from you." Daniel took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said. I'd like to talk more about that opportunity." James sounded pleased. "I thought you might. How about lunch tomorrow? My treat." They agreed on a time and place, and when Daniel hung up, he felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. He spent the rest of the day working, trying to focus on the familiar rhythm of repairs, but his mind kept drifting to the possibilities ahead. The next day, Daniel arrived at the small diner James had chosen. It was a cozy place, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. James was already there, seated in a booth near the window. He greeted Daniel with a warm handshake and motioned for him to sit. "Thanks for meeting me," Daniel said, sliding into the booth. "Thank you for considering my offer," James replied. "I won't waste your time. Let's get right to it." Over steaming mugs of coffee and plates of hearty sandwiches, James outlined his vision. He explained that one of his newer shops, located in a growing suburban area, needed a strong manager to take the reins. It wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about building a team, creating a reputation, and making the shop a cornerstone of the community. "I've seen what you're capable of," James said. "Your integrity, your work ethic, that's exactly what I need, and I'm willing to make it worth your while." The salary he offered was more than Daniel had ever dreamed of making. There were benefits, too: health insurance, paid vacation, even a retirement plan. But more than that, there was the promise of growth, of being part of something bigger. "It's a big step," Daniel said, his voice uncertain. "I'd be leaving behind everything I've built." "I understand," James said, "but think of it as a new chapter, not an ending. You'll still be doing what you love, just on a larger scale, and you'll have the support you need to make it something truly special." Daniel sat back, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He thought of his small shop, the place he had poured his heart and soul into. But he also thought of Rachel's words, of the card still tucked in his pocket. "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'm in." James beamed, extending his hand. "You won't regret it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Daniel began winding down operations at his shop, notifying his regular customers, and selling off some of his older equipment. It was bittersweet, saying goodbye to the place that had been his world for so long. But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. When the day finally came to open the doors of his new shop, Daniel felt a surge of pride and anticipation. The space was modern and well-equipped, a far cry from the humble garage he had called home. Yet, as he greeted his new team and welcomed his first customers, he realized that the heart of his work remained the same. It wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about helping people. That evening, as he locked up and stepped out into the crisp winter air, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The decision he had feared making was already proving to be the right one. And as he looked up at the stars shining above, He couldn't help but wonder what new opportunities the future would bring. Building a new legacy. Daniel Brooks stood in the center of his new shop, the smell of fresh paint mingling with the scent of motor oil. The shop was larger than his old one, with a sleek, modern design and rows of gleaming equipment that made his old tools look like relics. A large sign above the garage doors read Lawson Automotive, and beneath it, smaller letters spelled out Daniel Brooks, manager. Seeing his name displayed like that sent a small thrill through him, but it also brought a weight of responsibility. This wasn't just a repair shop. It was a chance to create something new, a place where he could put his skills and values to work on a larger scale. As he walked the floor, his boots echoing against the polished concrete, he could hear the faint hum of activity. His new team, a mix of seasoned mechanics and eager apprentices, was already hard at work. "Boss," called out Kevin, one of the younger mechanics. He was crouched near a car, holding up a wrench with a confused expression. "What's the torque spec on this?" Daniel grinned, walking over to him. "Depends on the make and model. Let me take a look." Within minutes, Daniel was on the floor beside Kevin, showing him the proper technique. It reminded him of his early days, learning from grizzled old-timers who didn't have time for mistakes. But Daniel had promised himself he'd lead differently. He wasn't just here to manage. He was here to teach, to guide, and to inspire. By lunchtime, the shop was buzzing with activity. Customers came and went, and Daniel made it a point to greet each one personally. It was a small-town habit he wasn't willing to lose. People seemed to appreciate it, and Daniel noticed the way their faces lit up when he called them by name or asked about their families. As he wiped his hands on a rag, he saw a familiar face walk through the door. Rachel Lawson stood near the front desk, looking around with an approving smile. Beside her, Emily clutched a small bouquet of flowers wrapped in festive paper. "Rachel, Emily," Daniel called out, striding over to greet them. "What brings you here?" Emily stepped forward, her cheeks pink with excitement. "These are for you," she said, holding out the bouquet. Daniel knelt down, accepting the flowers with a smile. "Well, thank you, Emily. These are beautiful. What's the occasion?" "Mom said you're starting something big," Emily replied matter-of-factly. "We wanted to say good luck." Rachel laughed softly, stepping forward. "We're proud of you, Daniel. I know this wasn't an easy decision, but I think you're going to do great things here." Daniel straightened, holding the flowers carefully. "Thanks. That means a lot coming from you. Both of you." Rachel glanced around the shop, her gaze settling on the mechanics working diligently. "You've got a good team. Dad said you'd make this place special, and I can already tell he was right." Her words settled in Daniel's chest, warm and reassuring. "I just want to do right by the people who come through those doors," he said. "Fix their cars, sure, but also treat them with respect. Let them know they're in good hands." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think you've already succeeded." As they chatted, a man entered the shop, glancing around nervously. His clothes were well worn, and his hands were rough with calluses. He approached the counter hesitantly, clearing his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low. "I was wondering if you might have time to take a look at my truck. It's been acting up, and I don't have anyone else to turn to." Daniel stepped forward, giving the man a reassuring smile. "Of course. Let's take a look." Outside, the man's truck was an old model, its paint chipped and its body showing signs of years of hard use. Daniel popped the hood and immediately saw the problem: a cracked radiator hose. It wasn't a difficult fix, but the man's expression told Daniel everything he needed to know. "How bad is it?" the man asked, his voice tight with worry. "It's not too bad," Daniel said. "I can replace the hose today, and you'll be good to go." The man let out a sigh of relief. "That's great, but—" He hesitated, glancing down at his worn boots. "I'm between jobs right now. I don't have much to spare." Daniel studied him for a moment before nodding. "Tell you what," he said. You cover the cost of the part, and I'll take care of the rest. Deal." The man's eyes widened. "You'd do that for me?" "It's what we do here," Daniel said simply. "Let's get you back on the road." By the time the truck was running smoothly again, the man was nearly in tears. He shook Daniel's hand repeatedly, thanking him over and over before driving off. Daniel watched the truck disappear down the road, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. This was why he had taken the leap, because he wanted to make a difference, not just in the lives of his customers, but in his own. As he turned back toward the shop, Rachel was waiting for him, her arms crossed, and a knowing smile on her face. "Still fixing cars for free, huh?" she teased. Daniel shrugged. "Old habits die hard." Rachel laughed, but there was admiration in her eyes. "You're doing more than fixing cars, Daniel. You're changing lives." He looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Maybe she was right. Maybe this wasn't just a new job or a bigger shop. Maybe this was the start of something much bigger, a legacy he could be proud of. That night, as he locked up and walked to his truck, Daniel carried Emily's bouquet with him. He placed it carefully on the passenger seat, glancing at the shop one last time before climbing in. The sign above the doors glowed softly in the moonlight, and for the first time, Daniel felt a deep sense of belonging. He wasn't just managing a shop, he was building something that mattered. And as he drove home, the stars above seemed to shine just a little brighter, as if to remind him that the best was yet to come. The ripple effect. The shop had been open for 3 months, and Daniel Brooks was already seeing the fruits of his labor. The team was running smoothly, the customer base was growing, and the shop was earning a reputation as a place where people felt cared for, not just their cars but also their concerns, their time, and their wallets. Word of mouth spread quickly, and soon customers were driving in from neighboring towns just to have their vehicles serviced by Daniel's team. Daniel's leadership style was a significant part of the shop's success. He wasn't just a manager. He was a mentor, a friend, and a problem solver. His door was always open, and he made it a point to treat everyone, employees and customers alike, with respect and understanding. One afternoon, as Daniel was tightening a bolt under the hood of an old station wagon, he heard a commotion near the front desk. Wiping his hands, he walked over to find Kevin, one of the younger mechanics, looking distressed. A woman in her late 40s stood at the counter, her voice sharp and accusatory. "This is the 3rd time I've had to come back," she said, her tone rising. "And now you're telling me there's another problem." Daniel stepped in, placing a steadying hand on Kevin's shoulder. "What seems to be the issue, ma'am?" he asked calmly. The woman turned her sharp gaze to Daniel. "I came in last week for a brake job, and now my car is making a noise. I don't have the time or money to keep coming back here." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand how frustrating that must be. Let's take a look and see what's going on. If it's something we missed, we'll make it right at no cost to you." His calm demeanor seemed to diffuse some of her anger, and she reluctantly agreed. Daniel personally inspected her car and found that the noise was coming from a loose heat shield, a completely unrelated issue that had likely started after the initial repair. "This isn't related to the brakes," Daniel explained when he returned. "But I'll fix it for you, no charge. I appreciate you bringing it in." The woman's stern expression softened. "You'd do that, even though it's not your fault." "Absolutely," Daniel said. "We stand by our work, and we want you to feel confident coming back to us." By the time she left, the woman was smiling, her earlier frustration replaced with gratitude. Kevin, who had been watching the interaction closely, approached Daniel afterward. "Thanks for stepping in," Kevin said. "I didn't know how to handle that." "It's all about listening," Daniel replied. "People just want to feel heard. And when you go the extra mile, it makes all the difference." The shop's reputation for kindness and integrity began to draw attention beyond the local community. One day, as Daniel was finishing up an oil change, a man in a suit walked in, carrying a briefcase. He introduced himself as Mark Grayson, a journalist for a regional business magazine. "We've been hearing about what you're doing here," Mark said, pulling out a notepad. "I'd love to write a feature about your shop." Daniel was taken aback. "I'm not sure we're that interesting." Mark smiled. "From what I've heard, you're more than interesting. You're changing the way people think about car repair shops. I want to share your story." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed, and over the next week, Mark interviewed him, his employees, and several loyal customers. The article, titled "The Mechanic Who's Fixing More Than Just Cars," was published a month later. It highlighted Daniel's journey, his dedication to his work, and his commitment to treating people with compassion and respect. The response was overwhelming. Customers began calling to thank Daniel for his approach, and several even stopped by just to shake his hand. But it wasn't just customers who took notice. One evening, as Daniel was closing up, his phone buzzed with a text from James Lawson. "Read the article. Proud of you. Let's talk soon." Daniel smiled, tucking the phone back into his pocket. James had been a steady presence in the background, offering advice and support when needed but never interfering. Daniel was grateful for the trust James had placed in him. The next week, James visited the shop. He stood in the waiting area, watching as Daniel and his team worked. When Daniel finally had a moment to join him, James was smiling. "You've done a remarkable job here," James said. "The article was just the beginning. People are paying attention, Daniel." Daniel shrugged, his modesty evident. "I'm just doing what I've always done." James shook his head. "It's more than that. You've built something special, a place where people feel valued. That's rare, and it's why I want to talk to you about the next step." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Next step?" James gestured toward the shop. "This is just one location. I want to replicate what you've created here. Open more shops like this, with the same values and customer-first approach. And I want you to lead that effort." Daniel's breath caught. "You're asking me to oversee multiple shops?" "I am," James said. "You've proven that you're not just a great mechanic, you're a great leader. And I think you can inspire others to follow your example." The idea was daunting. Daniel had spent most of his life working with his hands, solving problems under the hoods of cars. But the thought of expanding, of creating something even bigger, stirred something deep inside him. "I'll need some time to think about it," Daniel said finally. "Take all the time you need," James replied. "But I believe in you, Daniel. Whatever you decide, I know you'll make it work." That night, as Daniel sat in his small apartment, he thought about everything that had happened since Christmas. A simple act of kindness had set off a chain reaction, leading him to this moment. He thought about the lives he had touched, the team he had built, and the opportunity James was offering. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time, he felt ready to take the wheel. Weighing the next step, Daniel sat in his apartment, the glow of the article on his tablet screen reflecting in his eyes. The words written about him felt surreal. How a mechanic from a small town had redefined the customer experience in the auto repair industry. He traced the edges of his coffee mug with his fingers, letting James's offer replay in his mind like a loop recording. More shops like this, with you leading the way. The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. Could he really leave behind the hands-on work he loved so much to manage something on such a large scale? Would he lose the personal connection he had worked so hard to build? Daniel set the tablet down and glanced at the bouquet of flowers Emily had given him, now sitting in a vase on the kitchen counter. The small gift was a reminder of the impact he had made, an impact that could grow if he accepted James's offer. The next day at the shop, Daniel's mind was still clouded with thoughts of expansion as he worked through the routine of the day. His team seemed to sense his distraction, though no one said anything until Kevin, the youngest member of the crew, cornered him during a coffee break. "Boss, you okay?" Kevin asked, his voice hesitant. "You've been quieter than usual." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Just got a lot on my mind." Kevin hesitated, then added, "If it's about the article or whatever Mr. Lawson wants, I think you should go for it. You've got something special here, and I think more places could use someone like you." Daniel looked at Kevin, surprised. "You really think so?" Kevin nodded earnestly. "Yeah. I mean, look at this place. Before you came, I was just a guy who liked working on cars. Now I feel like I'm part of something bigger. You did that, and I know you can do it somewhere else, too." Daniel's chest tightened at Kevin's words. He hadn't realized how deeply his leadership had influenced his team. It wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about building a culture of trust, respect, and support. Later that evening, Rachel and Emily stopped by the shop. Emily ran ahead, clutching a small drawing in her hands. "Mr. Daniel, look what I made." She held up the paper proudly. It was a crayon drawing of a car with Daniel standing next to it, a big smile on his face. Above the car, Emily had written in wobbly letters, "Best mechanic ever." Daniel knelt down to take the drawing, his heart swelling. "Thank you, Emily. This is the best thing I've seen all day." Rachel approached with a smile, her arms crossed. "She's been working on that for hours. She wanted to make sure you knew how much we appreciate you." Daniel looked at Rachel, her words hitting him like a warm embrace. "I'm glad I could help," he said softly. "You two mean a lot to me." Rachel tilted her head, studying him. "You've got that look again, like there's a big decision weighing on you." Daniel sighed, standing up. "James wants me to oversee more shops, expand what we've built here." "And you're not sure if you should?" Rachel asked. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "I love what I do here, the hands-on work, the connection with people. I'm afraid if I take on more, I'll lose that." Rachel stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Do you know why this shop works so well? It's because of you, Daniel. Your heart, your integrity, your leadership. If you expand, you won't lose that. You'll spread it. And maybe there's someone out there, like Kevin, who needs someone like you to show them how it's done." Daniel looked at her, her words echoing what Kevin had said earlier. "You think I can handle it?" Rachel smiled. "I know you can." That night, Daniel stayed at the shop long after closing, walking through the empty space and reflecting on everything that had brought him here. The tools, the cars, the people, it was all part of a journey he hadn't anticipated, but had embraced fully. And now, the road ahead stretched further than he had ever imagined. He picked up his phone and dialed James Lawson's number. It rang twice before James answered, his voice steady and warm. "Daniel," James said, "good to hear from you." "I've been thinking about your offer," Daniel said, his voice firm but calm. "And I'm ready to take the next step." There was a pause on the other end, then James's voice came through, filled with approval. "I knew you would be. Welcome aboard, Daniel. Let's build something great together." As Daniel ended the call, a wave of clarity washed over him. This wasn't just about managing more shops or expanding a business. This was about creating a ripple effect, one act of kindness leading to another, one small moment growing into something larger than life. And as he locked up for the night, Daniel felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the same principles that had guided him so far, kindness, integrity, and hard work, would carry him forward into this new chapter. A new chapter, a wider road. The months following Daniel Brooks's decision to take on James Lawson's offer were a whirlwind of change. His shop, once the heartbeat of a small corner of town, became the foundation for a growing network of repair centers that embodied the values Daniel held dear. It wasn't just about fixing cars anymore. It was about building a legacy. The first shop to open under Daniel's leadership was in a bustling suburban area a few towns over. Daniel threw himself into every detail, from the layout of the garage to the recruitment of the team. He handpicked each mechanic, looking not just for skill, but also for character. He wanted people who would carry forward the spirit of kindness and integrity that had defined his work. On the grand opening day of the new location, the shop buzzed with energy. Customers filed in to see the sleek new space, lured by the promise of excellent service and the glowing reviews of Daniel's first shop. A small stage had been set up in the parking lot, and a local radio station broadcast live from the event. James Lawson stood beside Daniel, beaming with pride. "You've done an incredible job here," he said, clapping Daniel on the back. "This is just the beginning." Daniel nodded, scanning the crowd. Families wandered through the shop, children's faces lighting up as mechanics showed them tools and let them sit in gleaming cars. Kevin, the young mechanic from his original team, was now the lead technician at the new location. He was in his element, explaining the inner workings of an engine to a wide-eyed boy. The sight filled Daniel with pride. Kevin's growth was a testament to what could happen when someone was given a chance and the right guidance. It reminded Daniel of the opportunities James had extended to him and how far he had come since that quiet Christmas morning. A few hours into the event, Daniel spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Rachel Lawson stood near the stage, her daughter Emily by her side. Emily waved enthusiastically when she saw Daniel, clutching another drawing in her hand. Daniel excused himself and walked over to them. "Rachel, Emily," he said warmly, "I'm glad you made it." Emily held up her drawing, a colorful depiction of the new shop, with Daniel standing proudly in front of it. Above the shop, she had written in bold letters, "Best manager ever." "This is amazing," Daniel said, crouching to accept the drawing. "Thank you, Emily. I'm going to hang this in my office." Rachel smiled, her eyes reflecting the pride she felt. "We wouldn't miss this for the world," she said. "You've created something truly special, Daniel." Daniel stood, looking at her. "I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted. "You and Emily. You were the reason I started down this path." Rachel's expression softened. "You were always meant to do this. You just needed a little push." Daniel nodded, his heart full. "I'm glad you gave me that push." Over the next few months, Daniel continued to oversee the new shop while preparing for the launch of 2 more locations. His days were long, filled with meetings, training sessions, and the occasional late-night repair when a team member needed a hand. Despite the growing demands of his role, Daniel made it a point to stay connected to his roots. He still rolled up his sleeves and worked on cars, reminding his team and himself that the heart of their business was the people they served. One day, as he was reviewing blueprints for the next shop, he received a call from James. "We've had some interest from investors," James said. "They want to expand even further, maybe take this model nationwide." Daniel was silent for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. "Nationwide," he repeated. "Yes," James said. "And they want you to lead the charge." The idea was staggering. Daniel had barely adjusted to managing a growing network of shops in the region, and now there was talk of taking it to a national level. It was an opportunity beyond anything he had imagined, but it was also daunting. "Why me?" Daniel asked finally. "Because you've proven it works," James said simply. "Because people trust you, and because you care. This started with you, Daniel, and it's only right that you're the one to take it forward." Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the blueprints on his desk. He thought about how far he had come, how a single act of kindness on Christmas had led to this moment. He thought about the lives he had touched, from Rachel and Emily to Kevin and the countless customers who had walked through his doors, and he thought about the possibilities ahead. That evening, Daniel drove back to his original shop. The building was now rented out to another local business, but the memories were still fresh. He parked outside and walked around to the back, where the familiar workbench still stood. He placed his hands on the worn surface, the echoes of years spent there flooding back. In his pocket, he found the small card Rachel had written him on that Christmas years ago. He unfolded it, rereading the words that had guided him ever since. "Thank you for giving us a Christmas miracle. You have a rare gift. Don't be afraid to share it with the world." Daniel smiled, slipping the card back into his pocket. He had shared his gift, and the world had responded in ways he never could have imagined. And now, the road stretched wider and farther than ever before. As he drove away from the shop, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if lighting the path ahead. Daniel wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a builder, a leader, and a symbol of what could happen when kindness became a cornerstone. And as he prepared to take the next step, he knew one thing for certain. The journey was just beginning. The fitting final. The decision to take the expansion nationwide wasn't one Daniel made lightly. Over the next few weeks, he met with James, the investors, and his team, weighing the challenges and opportunities. With each conversation, the vision became clearer. A network of repair shops across the country, all rooted in the values he had built his career on: integrity, kindness, and exceptional service. One evening, as Daniel sat at his desk reviewing the proposed plans, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Kevin, now a rising star within the company. The message was short but powerful. "Thanks for believing in me, boss. None of us would be here without you." Daniel stared at the screen, his heart swelling with pride. Kevin's words reminded him of why he had started this journey. It wasn't about the profits or the prestige. It was about people, helping them, lifting them up, and showing them what was possible. The first step in the nationwide expansion was a pilot program in 5 cities, each representing a different region of the country. Daniel was deeply involved in every aspect, from designing the shops to recruiting the staff. He traveled constantly, spending long hours on planes, in hotels, and in the garages themselves. Yet, no matter where he was, he always made time to connect with the people. In one of the new locations, a young woman named Elena approached Daniel during a training session. She was fresh out of trade school, nervous but eager to prove herself. "Mr. Brooks," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say thank you for giving me this opportunity. I've heard so much about what you've done, and it's inspiring." Daniel smiled, seeing a bit of his younger self in her. "Call me Daniel," he said. "And you earned this opportunity. I'm just here to help you make the most of it." Over time, Elena became one of the standout mechanics in the network, her confidence growing with every success. Watching her thrive was a reminder to Daniel that the legacy he was building wasn't just about shops. It was about people like her. As the pilot program flourished, Daniel was invited to speak at a national conference for small business owners. Standing on the stage in front of hundreds of people, he felt a mix of nerves and gratitude. He shared his story, from the small shop on the edge of town to the growing network of Lawson automotive centers. He spoke about Rachel and Emily, about Kevin, and about the countless others who had been part of the journey. "Success isn't just about what you build," Daniel said, his voice steady. "It's about who you build it with. Every shop, every team, every customer. They're all part of something bigger. And it all starts with one small act of kindness." The audience erupted into applause, and Daniel felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the stage lights. He had come a long way, but he had never forgotten where it all began. Back at his original shop, now lovingly preserved as a community hub, Daniel hosted a gathering for his team and their families. Rachel and Emily were there, along with James, Kevin, and many others whose lives had been touched by Daniel's work. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the shop, Emily approached Daniel with another drawing. This time, it showed a map of the United States, with stars marking the locations of the Lawson automotive centers. Above it, she had written in bold letters, "Helping people everywhere." Daniel knelt down, accepting the drawing with a smile. "Thank you, Emily. This is perfect." Rachel stood nearby, her eyes shining with pride. "You've done something incredible, Daniel. You've changed lives." Daniel looked around at the faces of his friends and colleagues, the people who had made it all possible. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "This was all of us together." As the night wore on, and the gathering turned into a celebration, Daniel felt a profound sense of fulfillment. What had started as a small act of kindness, a simple decision to fix a car for free on Christmas, had grown into something extraordinary. And as he stood outside the shop, the stars twinkling above, Daniel knew that this was more than an ending. It was the start of a legacy that would endure, built on kindness, hard work, and the belief that one person could make a difference. For Daniel Brooks, the road ahead was wide open, and the possibilities were endless. But no matter where it led, he knew he would always stay true to the values that had brought him here. The journey had come full circle, and it was only just beginning.